On June 28, 1914, Gavrilo Princip assassinated the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, one of the most powerful nations in Europe at the time. This assassination plot almost didn't happen. See, Gavrilo was part of a terrorist group called the Black Hand. They were all very upset that Austria-Hungary had taken over their native land, Serbia. There were riots in the streets, people were very, very angry, and Prince Ferdinand thought that the best thing to do to calm these conquered people down was for him to parade in front of them. I don't know about you, but I don't think watching my new master parade in front of me would calm me down. But anyway, he did it. Ferdinand and his wife Sophie came to Serbia and they held a parade. They were going down the street in an open convertible when one member of the Black Hand threw a bomb into the carriage, into the car, and it landed right on Franz Ferdinand's lap. He picked it up and threw it out, and it blew up in the street, not hurting anyone. Everyone was freaked out, and so they took the parade down a side street where they just so happened to go past a cafe with outdoor seating. And who's eating a sandwich in that cafe but Mr. Gavrilo Princip? He pulls out his gun, jumps towards the car, and shoots both Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie. They died very, very quickly thereafter. Franz Ferdinand's last words were, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die, live for our children." By the way, if you think that it wasn't a very clever idea for the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary to go to this place that doesn't like him very much, well, you're not alone. Lots of his security guards had said the same thing. In fact, he had been warned by multiple top authorities that he really should not go, but he's the prince, so if he wants to go, he's going to go. Now, the day of the parade, his hotel's on this mountain overseeing the city, and as they're leaving, there's some grease or something on the axles of his car that starts burning off, and so there's a little bit of smoke coming out of his car. And he says, "Well, this is a good omen. Our car burns up here, and down there they will throw bombs at us." And that's exactly what happened. Another fun fact about this parade, he put the schedule and the route in the newspaper for the week before. Everyone knew exactly where he was going to be. Maybe not the best idea security-wise. Now, what do you think should happen when someone murders a very important personage? Well, think about what's happened in America when one of our presidents has been assassinated. Consider Abraham Lincoln. He was assassinated, and we caught the guy, we shot him. What happened when Garfield was assassinated? We got the guy, we shot him. What happened when JFK was assassinated? We caught the guy, someone else shot him, so we shot that guy. And this should be an open and shut case. There was a guy who murdered someone in the open street. There were dozens of witnesses. He tried running away, but there's dozens of soldiers and policemen around. They capture him very quickly. They throw him in jail, they rough him up, and eventually they do hang him. But is that the end of the story? No. You see, this murder is actually going to cost millions and millions more lives. You see, Austria-Hungary takes a very dim view of the Serbs and Croats and Bosnians and everyone else living in that region. They're rather racist against them. And when these people are rioting and then eventually kill the heir to the throne, they take it very personally, as maybe you would as well. And so they say that they're going to invade once more these places that they've already conquered. They're going to invade again, have military rule, and just be generally unpleasant. When this happens, all these little nations that are being bullied by Austria-Hungary, they have a protector. There is one nation that is racially and religiously and even ethnically very similar to Serbia and Bosnia and Croatia, and that is Russia. They all speak a very similar language. It's a family called Cyrillic. Their alphabet is the same, not at all like our alphabet. They're all Eastern Orthodox. And so when Austria-Hungary is attacking these little guys, Russia comes to their aid. And Russia says, if you invade Serbia, we will attack you. And so they get their army ready. That's called mobilization, getting all your troops ready, getting extra supplies, building more tanks and guns. Actually, there weren't any tanks yet, but guns and food and supplies. Well, when that happens, Austria-Hungary has a defender as well. Germany has been their friend for many years, and Germany says, hey, Russia, if you attack Austria-Hungary, we'll attack you. So they mobilize and get ready for war. Well, now Russia has a friend who's going to protect them, France. France says, hey, Germany, if you get involved, we're going to get involved. And so now you have all these different guys. You have Serbia, Bosnia, all these little guys being attacked by Austria-Hungary. Then Austria-Hungary is getting attacked by Russia, and Russia is getting attacked by Germany, and Germany is getting attacked by France. Very soon, all the smaller nations of Europe, less important, less powerful nations of Europe, are going to have to pick a side as well. And within just a few months, the sides are drawn up. On one side, you have what we call the Central Powers, because they're right in the central part of Europe. You have the Ottoman Empire, which is what you would probably call Turkey right now. They control much of the Middle East. Ottoman Empire, you have Austria-Hungary and Germany. Those are the three biggest ones. There's also Bulgaria is one of those guys that doesn't like the Serbs, but they're not all that powerful. And then there's dozens of different allies around the world that are on their side. On the other side, you have what we sometimes call the Allied powers. You have Russia, you have France, and pretty soon you're going to have England and then America as well. Russia, France, England, and America are the four biggest powers on the Allied side. And then, of course, you have dozens of little guys all around the world who are on their side as well. So what could have been a single trial, a single murder, a single person brought to justice, actually ended up in a world war. Now, I'm guessing you know an awful lot more about World War II than World War I. It gets a lot more attention. There are so many movies and video games about World War II and hardly any about World War I. One of the most recent ones I can think of is Wonder Woman, and it doesn't even tell the story of World War I. It just uses World War I as a backdrop. Why are there not more movies and books and video games about World War I? Well, I think the biggest reason is that it's kind of hard to tell who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. There's other reasons too. Like in World War II, there's lots of very decisive battles, Pearl Harbor, D-Day. In World War I, it's just a lot of people getting killed over the same few miles, and the sides don't move very fast at all. So it's not as exciting, just kind of more depressing. But the big reason is it's hard to tell who the bad guys are. And a lot of people point towards the Central Powers and say, well, here's a list of things they've done wrong. You know what? The good guys did a lot of the same things. Let me give you examples. Germany and Austria and the Ottoman Empire, they were very aggressive. They were ready to start a war at the drop of a hat. Anything happens, let's kill everybody. They were also very imperialistic. They had taken their army around the world. I'm thinking Africa and the East Indies in particular. And they had colonized and conquered people around the world. You go, oh, that's not nice. That's bad. You shouldn't be so militaristic and just shoot everyone you don't like. And you go, well, wait a second. The good guys did the exact same thing. England, the empire never, or the sun never sets on the British Empire. France had about half of Africa colonized. Russia had a huge empire. Even America. See, just a few decades before, we fought a war against the Spaniards, and at the beginning of the war, Congress passed a very noble law that says we will not take a single acre out of this war. We're not doing this war to gain any land. Well, that's really nice, but we didn't follow our own law. After the war, we got the Philippines, we got Puerto Rico, which is why Lin-Manuel Miranda is an American citizen, and we got Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and a few other properties as well. So even America is guilty of just attacking people we don't like and taking all their land. So yeah, it's bad that Germany and Austria-Hungary are so ready to start a war against anybody. The good guys were like that too. Everyone was like that. Some people point at the Central Powers and go, oh, these things, they all have something in common. The German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Ottoman Empire. They're all empires run by emperors. There's no democracy. There's no voting. Well, wait a second. Well, Russia was ruled by a czar. He was an emperor. There was no democracy in Russia. And France. Remember last video we told you about the government of France and how terrible it was? That's true. England and America had pretty good governments, but it wasn't as clear cut who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. Well, when the war started, Germany said, we need to take care of France. But the French had all their army right on the very small German-French border. So the Germans, to say, well, how can we get around the French border, went through a neutral country on its way to attack France. That country was Belgium. You see, they had a peace treaty with Belgium. In fact, all of Europe signed a peace treaty saying that Belgium can be neutral forever. And Germany attacked Belgium. Belgium tried to defend themselves, but they're tiny compared to Germany. Many Belgians died, cities were burnt down, people were badly mistreated. When people complained to the German general and said, "You have this treaty that says that you'll be our friend," the German general said, "It's just a scrap of paper." Oh, that was bad. That's actually what made England join the war. England was going to say, "Hey, we're staying out of this. None of our business if one guy murders one other guy. We're not going to go to war over that." But when Germany attacked neutral Belgium, England stood up and said, "I'm going to defend these guys." Good for you, England. But now England's in the war. He said, "Oh, Germany, you invaded a neutral country. That's terrible. How could you?" Well, a couple years later, England decided that they needed to invade Greece. See, Greece was neutral as well, but half of Greece really, really wanted to join the war. You see, Greece had a long-standing feud with the Ottoman Empire. They had been fighting for centuries, literally centuries. Remember the fall of the Byzantine Empire? That's Greece. That's Greece versus Turkey for hundreds of years. And so the king of Greece says, "We will be neutral. This war is none of our business. I don't want Greek soldiers dying because one guy murdered one other guy. None of our business." Well, the Greek prime minister said, "Hey, here's a good chance to attack the Ottoman Empire and gain some land, gain some territory, and just get some revenge." Well, the prime minister and the king split the government in half, and they were starting a civil war against one another. The king said, "Stay out of the war." Prime minister said, "Get into the war." And guess which half of the government the Allies decided was the true government? Well, the one that was on their side. And so the Allies invaded neutral Greece. Not a good plan. And lastly, it was not very clear which side that America would join. We're seeing problems on both sides. We're really looking at this war and saying, this war is not a necessary war. People should calm down and stop killing each other. We want to stay out of it. Woodrow Wilson won a presidential campaign with the slogan, "He kept us out of war." That's how much America doesn't want to join the war. But if we do join, which side should we join? Well, a lot of our citizens are of French and English descent, so we have a lot of Allied supporters. But you know what? There are at least 11 million German people in America at the time. A large percentage of Americans were German and were sympathetic towards the Central Powers cause. So it was not very clear at first which side we should join or which side we would join. Well, the German army rampaged through Belgium very quickly, and they rampaged through the north of France as well, getting within 15 miles of Paris. At that time, they thought if they could get the capital city of the nation would surrender. And they were 15 miles away. They were stopped on the Marne River, 15 miles away. Guys, some of you live 15 miles away from school. Imagine if the entire enemy army is that close to you. That's scary. Well, there's some incredible stories from this heroic defense that the French put up last minute. There's the story of the taxi cab army. There's lots of French soldiers stationed in Paris. Some of them are there on vacation. Some of them are there awaiting orders, and they can't get to the front lines. So all the taxis of Paris say pile in, and 8 or 9 or 10 soldiers are cramming in these taxis, and they're in this line going to the front lines, dropping off the soldiers, and then going all the way back and doing this loop, 15 miles there, 15 miles back, delivering more and more and more soldiers to the front lines. And it works. Another fun story from the Battle of the Marne is when Field Marshal Ferdinand Foch was asked how the battle is going. He said, "My center is giving way, my right is retreating. Situation excellent, I'm attacking." In French, that's j'attaque. And fun story, ever since then, whenever I'm playing a video game and I'm about to commit my army, I always do a save file and I name that file j'attaque. The Germans were hoping for a quick war. They were hoping to defeat France within just a few weeks and then turn all their might to Russia, defeat them as well. Unfortunately for them, that's not what happened. The French did push them back away from Paris, and they settled down in the north of France for trench warfare. This is a brand new style of warfare brought on by a brand new style of fighting, machine guns. Machine guns have, for the first time, been put into broad use, and they kill everything so efficiently that the only strategy against them is to hide. That's the best you can do. So both sides settled down in the north of France, digging trenches, and they hid behind their trenches. And anytime it's time to attack, you gather all your men and you rush forward. And when you rush forward, most of your men are going to die. Maybe they'll get that trench, but then the next day, the other army is going to counterattack. Most of their men will die, but they might win that trench as well. For the next several years, millions of people will die and hardly any land is going to be gained or lost. You might win a huge battle and get half a mile of land, and then the next day lose that again, and maybe lose a whole mile of land. And the lines are just going back and forth, and nothing's happening but people dying. That situation led to people saying, how can we defeat trench warfare? How can we defeat the machine gun and get out of this? So they invented some new weapons. First weapon is poison gas. They use canisters like, have you seen those big helium canisters or CO2 cartridges? It's these big canisters filled up with poison. Sometimes it's chlorine gas. Yeah, like the chlorine in your pool, but not in liquid form, in gas form. That stuff's nasty. If you ever spilled some chlorine bleach on you when you're doing the laundry, it can make your hands kind of sting a little bit. Now imagine if that's aerated and put in your lungs. You die. There's another type of gas called mustard gas, and no, it has nothing to do with mustard. It just smells like mustard, which is why it's called that. Some of these gases will be in the air for days at a time before they disperse, and they will kill you with a single whiff. And if you don't quite die, you could go permanently blind. That's one of the first things to go. You can have this awful nerve damage. It's just really, really, really terrible. One of the worst things about gas warfare is you don't know where the gas is going to go. You open up that canister and you run, and you hope the wind pushes it towards the enemy. Sometimes it goes back on your own soldiers, and sometimes a cloud of poison gas will just drift towards a village and kill everyone there. You know, some people don't understand why certain weapons are banned and say, well, it's illegal to kill someone with that weapon. You're like, why? Killing someone's killing someone. Well, you have no control over poison gas. It can kill man, woman, child, and it can linger in the air for days or weeks. That's why it has been banned today. Gas was not used in World War II, even though both sides had lots of gas, because a young Adolf Hitler was a corporal in World War I. He saw the damage gas did and he was scared of it. He got a tiny whiff of gas once and was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And so when it was his turn to fight a war, Adolf Hitler said, we're not using gas because if we use gas against them, they'll use gas against us and it'll be terrifying. So gas warfare was trying to kill everyone in the trench so all your guys don't die going out there. And the next weapon is airplanes. Airplanes had been invented just a few years before. They're still those very early biplanes. Many of them don't even have windshields. You're completely exposed. And there are no guns on airplanes. We use airplanes first primarily for reconnaissance. We just go up there and look and see where the enemy army is. Well, some people started saying the enemy is also doing reconnaissance, so they would take pistols up with them. And there'd be 2 biplanes, and the pilots pull out pistols and try to shoot each other, and then rifles try to shoot each other. Sometimes they'd go over the enemy army and try to throw grenades over the side, out the door, out the window. There was one weapon in early aerial warfare that was just a big box full of metal darts, and you just dump them out over the enemy, and the metal darts come down and they'll get you. Well, eventually people figured out ways of holding a great big bomb underneath the airplane with a release mechanism that you could have in the cockpit, so you wouldn't just have to carry a bunch of grenades with you. And then someone decided it would be a great idea if we mounted a machine gun onto the airplane. Well, the problem with that is that you'd be shooting your own propeller. These propellers were very big, and the machine gun would shoot right in them. Well, a brilliant Frenchman figured out a way to time the firing of the machine gun just perfectly so that each bullet goes right through the openings of the propeller. Can you imagine timing a speeding bullet and a speeding propeller so that the bullets miss the propeller every time? That's incredible. When that device was invented, now we have the first fighter bombers, and they could strafe the enemy on the ground. They could attack enemy fighters as well. Pretty interesting. The Germans stole this plan and they tried to make their own, and they didn't do it very well. So sometimes they did shoot down their own propellers, but towards the end of the war, both sides were getting the fighters working pretty well. I'm sure you know the story of Snoopy versus the Red Baron. That's all World War one of those very few World War One stories. The last really new weapon of warfare to get out of trench warfare is the tank. The tank was the brainchild of the British. They had experimented with armored cars in Africa, and this is what they would do. They would go to rich people's houses and take their Rolls Royces, nicest cars around, and they just slap a bunch of 1 inch thick metal sheets all around them and stick a machine gun on top. Boom, armored car. Just a Rolls Royce with armor and a machine gun. 3 of those defeated Ethiopia. 3 armored cars, 2 with machine guns, 1 with a mortar launcher. Took the Ethiopian capital city of Addis Ababa all by themselves. Pretty interesting. So they developed a new type of weapon that used tractor treads and a tractor engine, sheet metal all around, and it had 2 little guns pointing sideways. And its job was to go through the mud of no man's land, park on top of the trench, and shoot down the trench both ways. And then a bunch of infantry would be running behind the tank, and all the machine gun bullets would bounce right off the tank, not hurt anyone, and you would win. Unfortunately, the tank could only go about as fast as you could walk, so it was really slow. It was a very large target, so machine guns might not hurt it, but a grenade would, artillery would. And they broke down really, really quickly. So a lot of the tanks would just be having engine problems on the side of the road. But new kind of warfare trying to get out of trench warfare. A terrifying weapon that the Germans used to bomb England was the Zeppelin. I'm sure you've heard of the Hindenburg, and there are pictures in the beginning of your book of the Hindenburg. Imagine a Zeppelin like that. It is literally as large as the Titanic, floating in the sky, carrying hundreds of pounds of bombs, and it's floating over your city. Now, from the story of the Hindenburg, you might think, well, those things are explosive, right? Why don't you just shoot it? It's a huge target you can't miss. Well, the thing is, they are so big that even when you riddle it with holes, it takes a long time for all the gas to leak out. And when this blimp goes over England, drops all its bombs on London, and turns around, even when there's hundreds of holes in it, yeah, it is slowly losing altitude and losing all its hydrogen gas, but not slow enough. And it would get all the way back to Germany, where they could sew up the holes. And they wouldn't blow up because the bullets wouldn't have anything to spark against. So the British, they experimented with incendiary machine gun rounds. They would have hollow bullets, and every other bullet would have this special liquid in it. When you mix these 2 liquids together, they would explode. So you have liquid A, liquid B, liquid A, liquid B, liquid A, liquid B. They never quite got it to work until the very, very end of the war, but pretty interesting stuff. When that did work, boom, you have a massive explosion. While the Germans, French, and English are duking it out in northern France, losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers a year, the Germans are actually doing very well against Russia on the other side of the conflict. Russia is losing hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and they're losing a lot of land. And Russia had other problems too. Remember how in the last chapter there's all these revolutions and everyone hates their leaders, and the situation is not great. Well, people really did not like the Russian Tsar, Tsar Nicholas II. He went off to take care of the soldiers and lead the soldiers from the front lines, leaving Rasputin behind. Rasputin is the bad guy in the movie Anastasia. Not terribly accurate, but you get the idea. He was very much hated. And people are grumbling that A, we want out of this war, and B, Nicholas and Rasputin are doing a terrible job. So if we're going to be in this war, might as well do a good job. And they're just letting lots of people die for no reason. Well, there's all these grumblings of change. People want a big change. And the Germans hear about it, and they have a brilliant plan. You see, there was a guy who was kicked out of Russia for advocating killing the rich people and giving all their money to the poor. His name was Vladimir Lenin. He had to run away from Russia. Well, the Germans found him and they put him on a train back to Russia. Lenin goes to Moscow and he gets the people behind him saying, let's kill the Tsar, let's kill all the rich people, and let's be communists and share everything. And there's a civil war in Russia, and the communists win. Lenin wins. The very first thing that Lenin does when he's in charge is saying, I'm getting us out of this useless war. What do we have to do with the war? Who cares about Germany? Who cares about Austria-Hungary? Who cares that the prince was shot? Not us. We've already lost hundreds of thousands of soldiers. Well, because the Germans were winning, they had very strict requirements for the Russian surrender. When the Russians gave up and withdrew out of the war, they had to give an awful lot of land to the Germans. This is in the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1917, late 1917. Now Russia is out of the war. You know what that means? The entire German half of the army that was fighting Russia can now fight England and France. And hey, if it's really even between half of Germany's army, France, and England, what happens when they get another half of the army? Because Russia quit on them. Well, France and England are in for a lot of trouble. But of course, America comes to the rescue. One ally leaves, another ally comes in. Our president at the time was Woodrow Wilson, and if you remember from just a few minutes ago, his campaign slogan was, "He kept us out of war." Well, he's going to declare war on Germany in not too long. Why does he do that? Well, America tried to be neutral, but as the years go on, we realize there is a clear good side and a clear bad side. Maybe there wasn't before, and no, the good guys are not perfect, and the bad guys are not terribly different, but they've been doing some really bad things. We have to stop them. Coffee break. Thanks, Brittany. We were, of course, very upset that the Germans had attacked neutral Belgium, almost as upset as the British, and the British had attacked Germany because of that. We almost did, but we decided, you know what, that's Europe's problem, not our problem. We were really upset about how they treated the Belgians. They did not observe the regular rules of war to let civilians alone. They were being really, really nasty. And we were hearing lots of stories that France and England are telling us, hoping to get us into the war, but true stories nevertheless of just how cruel they were being. Another reason we entered the war was that one side did seem more clearly like it was all about democracy, and the other side was about kingship and dictators. Well, another important reason we entered the war is the war at sea. See, England was one of Germany's primary opponents, and they were an island. They were not self-sufficient. They had thousands of ships giving them supplies every year. Even basic food and necessities came to England from overseas. And Germany decided that if we want to kick England out of the war, we need to starve them out. So we need to defeat their ships. Only problem is, England has by far the biggest and best navy in the entire world. We can't just go up to them one-on-one and expect to win. So what do? Submarines. Or as the Germans call them, Unterseeboots, or U-boats. These submarines would torpedo these cargo ships and then run away and could not be found. It was very difficult at the time to find a submarine. The only way you could find it is when it comes up, you can try shooting at it. And a good thing for the defenders is if you make even a small hole in the submarine, it can't go down. You know, if you make a tiny hole in a German warship, it'll just patch it up and keep going. You can't do that with an Unterseeboot. Well, this new submarine warfare presented some pretty hard choices. You see, the normal thing to do when a naval ship is attacking a passenger or a transport ship is to simply walk up to it, sail up to it, and say, hey, we're taking your ship. Well, what do you do with all the civilian sailors? You put them on your own ship as prisoners and then sink the boat. Nobody has to die. Well, there's not enough room on a submarine for survivors. So at first, the U-boats would surface right next to a transport ship and say, hey, we're going to blow up your ship, get in your lifeboats. Everyone would get in their lifeboats, and then they blow it up. But they soon realized that's just opening us up to fire from these civilian ships, a lot of these civilian ships start arming themselves. And we can't do that. So they do sneak attacks. All of a sudden, boom, there's an explosion. The ship goes down and all these civilians die. And America says, we do not like that these civilians are dying. And then Americans start dying. See, at first, a lot of American sailors had joined the British, and American pilots had joined the British as volunteers. But then the Germans start shooting American ships that are trading with England. We say we're neutral. We'll trade with both sides, but England's closer to us, so we're going to trade with them first. The Germans start sinking our ships, and they sank 4 ships in 1 month. Hundreds of American civilian sailors are dying, and we say, oh, that is not okay. We still don't declare war yet, but we're getting angry. Then I'm sure you've heard of the sinking of the Lusitania. Over 1,000 people dead. It sank in just a few minutes. Huge torpedo explosion, probably blew up the steam engine on the ship because there were multiple explosions going on. See, with the Lusitania, this was a passenger ship that was going back and forth between New York and England. Well, the German embassy in America took out an advertisement right next to the advertisement for the Lusitania that said, reminder that we're at war with the English and we will shoot any English ship we see, so please do not get on the Lusitania. The Lusitania wasn't just a passenger ship, though. It was also carrying bullets from America going to England, which isn't a very neutral move, America, but well. Well, Americans disregarded the warning, and hundreds of Americans went on that passenger ship to go on vacation in England in the middle of World War I. Maybe not the smartest move, but that's beside the point. They got blown up, and they're civilians, and there was no chance of rescue. You don't kill civilians. And that almost brought us into the war, but not quite yet. This close. One of the last straws was that England intercepted a top secret telegraph message. This is called the Zimmermann telegraph. You see, a telegraph works by having just electrical signals go back and forth on a cable. Well, what happens if you stick your cable onto someone else's cable? You can listen in. That's exactly what the British did. They listened in on the German top secret telegraph and they were able to crack the code. The message was sent from Germany to Mexico, and it basically said this: hey, Mexico, if you invade America, we'll help you and we'll let you take back Texas and New Mexico and California and Arizona and all that land that you lost. You want to attack America, right? Mexico basically said, no, we don't want to pick a fight with America, because honestly, who would? But America said, hey, Germany, we're neutral. Why are you trying to get us dragged into this war? Not a good move. And eventually, America did declare war on Germany. Good thing, too. Remember, Russia had just left. America steps in, and we're going to turn the tide of that war. Now, America is not prepared for war, but we quickly hold a draft and get hundreds of thousands of men in training. We don't have enough guns for them all. And do you think we just have a couple 100,000 guns lying around in a warehouse somewhere? No. Maybe we should have, but we didn't. So a lot of these soldiers are training with sticks, and the instructors are kind of telling them how to aim the sticks, and it's not working very well. They're training to ride horses, which, by the way, there were over 1 million horses in Europe at the time. Training them to ride horses, and there are not enough horses to go around, so they're sitting on these barrels going, giddy up, giddy up. They're practicing their bayonets with, again, pointy sticks, poking at bags. So, don't know if that was the best training. But after a few months, when we get our act together, get the war machine rolling, 300,000 American soldiers arrive in France every single month until the end of the war. 300,000 American soldiers every month. And we turn the tide of the war. The war had been going on for several years at this point. Let's see here. The Archduke was assassinated in 1914. We really start fighting in 1918. 4 years. But when we come, we turn the tide of the war. And we just push slowly. It does go back and forth a little bit, but America pretty much pushes all the way to Germany until the Germans call for an armistice. We call that Veterans Day. Now the leaders of the victors meet in Paris to decide what to do to the losers. Now, Italy, France, and England, they've lost hundreds of thousands of men, and they are mad, and they want to really get payback for this war that they think they didn't really cause, but they probably could have prevented it from happening. But that's just beside the point. They want payback. Woodrow Wilson is the odd man out. He likes to think of himself as the good guy. He's the son of a preacher, and he thinks he's a very moral person. Now, he did resegregate the White House after it was desegregated, so not always the good guy, but he likes thinking himself as a nice guy. So he wanted to be kind to the losers. Woodrow Wilson said that he joined the war to make the world safe for democracy. Very nice goal. He said that this would be the war to end all wars, that it would be so horrible that no one would ever fight again. Nice thought. Not going to happen, but nice thought. He wanted to have a lasting peace built by making our enemies our friends. So he made a 14-point plan that would rebuild Germany and Austria-Hungary and the Ottoman Empire, make them better places to live in, and be nice to our friends. See, he wanted to have what he called peace without victory. Oh, there's no winners here. We're all trying to recover from the horrors of war. And France and England go, no, there is victory. There are winners and there are losers. We're the winners, they're the losers, and they have to pay for the war. Suffice it to say, most of his 14 points were completely rejected. They did not happen. And France and England made sure that Germany did pay, and pay through the nose. In fact, part of their payment was literally with money, and they only paid off the World War I debt a few years ago. In fact, it was October 2010, so 10 years ago is when Germany paid off the last of its war debt. Wilson's probably most important point, and the last one, was to prevent a war like this from ever happening again with an organization where the nations of the world could settle their differences by talking instead of by shooting each other. He called it the League of Nations, and every nation in the world would send representatives, and when there was a problem, the ambassadors would talk it out, and we'd all come to a mutually agreed upon decision, and no one would ever need to kill each other ever again. Sounds really nice. A lot of people are skeptical. And do you know who's the most skeptical of all? America. See, Woodrow Wilson was a Democrat, and he didn't like the Republicans very much, and he didn't take a single Republican with him to Paris to work on this peace treaty. In fact, the Republicans had the majority in Congress, so he needed Republican support to pass this peace treaty. He didn't have any Republicans with him, just a handful of Democratic senators, so that's okay. Well, he comes back home and he signed the peace treaty. He's started the League of Nations. The rest of Europe agrees to join the League of Nations, brings it to Congress for approval, and Congress says, no, we don't like it. And America does not join the League of Nations. That was America's idea to begin with. America also rejected the Treaty of Versailles. We did not agree to those terms. Many years later, Congress just simply said, World War I is over, officially. Said the war is over, whether we like it or not. Woodrow Wilson was so upset that Congress wouldn't pass entrance into the League of Nations that he decided to go on a tour of America begging people to call their congressmen to change their minds. And he worked so hard that he got a stroke, probably just from overworking, overstress, not getting enough sleep, got a stroke. And he was not seen for months. He was laid up in bed, and no one but the doctors and his wife were allowed to see him. During this time, America had probably its first female president, because whenever there was a decision that had to be made, a congressman would bring it to the White House. Mrs. Wilson would say, I'll ask my husband what he thinks. Go into the president's bedroom and come out a few minutes later with an answer. Most likely, Mr. Wilson had nothing to do with that, and Mrs. Wilson was running the country at the time. Very interesting. All right, so on page 338, it shows some of the most important clauses of the Treaty of Versailles. Number one, Germany would be broken up and Austria-Hungary and another treaty would be broken up into very small pieces. See, they are empires. An empire is not simply a large country. An empire is when one country controls another country. So it's like there's different nationalities, different ethnic groups within it. The Austro-Hungarian Empire was ruled by two separate nations. The Austrians and the Hungarians were the rulers, but they also had the Bosnians and the Croats and the Serbs and the Herzegovinians and all sorts of other little guys that they controlled. And America and the victors said, well, we got to break them up and give the people their own say and their own government. So no more empires, break them up. So Germany and Austria and Hungary lost a lot of land. In particular, Austria-Hungary went from being one of the largest nations in Europe to a dozen small nations. They're not going to be powerful ever again in world politics. Number two, the demilitarization of Germany. To make sure Germany would never start another war, we say you're only allowed to have a few thousand soldiers. You're not allowed to own any tanks, any airplanes, any heavy artillery. You're only allowed to have a certain number of battleships, other provisions like that that would keep Germany very weak. And lastly, Germany had to say that the entire war was all their fault, admit guilt. Was the entire war Germany's fault? Absolutely not. The war started when one murderer murdered one Austrian. Now, everyone overreacted. The war did not need to happen, but it's not just Germany's fault. Yeah, Germany is partially to blame, maybe even a lot to blame, but 100%? No, 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 no. If Austria-Hungary hadn't overreacted, there wouldn't have been a war. If Russia hadn't overreacted, there wouldn't have been a war. If Germany hadn't overreacted, if France hadn't overreacted. See, everyone was ready to kill each other. They just needed an excuse. It was not all Germany's fault. It was somewhat Germany's fault. But everyone wants to blame someone, and no one likes admitting their own problems, so let's all blame Germany. This clause was so upsetting to the Germans. They say it is not fair for us to be the number one only people blamed for World War I. It's not all of our fault. They are really angry at their own leaders for signing that. But their government says, what choice do we have? We lost the war. They're making us sign it basically at gunpoint. What could we have done? Well, that old German government gets kicked out. By the way, Kaiser Wilhelm of Germany escapes, runs away, and lives in a small village. I'm pretty sure it's in the Netherlands for the rest of his life. Never heard from again. And Germany starts a new government, a republic, and in a few decades, Germany is going to elect people who are very angry at France and England, and they're going to want some revenge. And one of those people's name is Adolf Hitler. Very wisely, a government official looking at the Treaty of Versailles said, this is not peace. This is a 20 or 30-year pause in war. That's exactly what happened. Well, what was the aftermath of World War I? There were lots of things that were different after the war than before. First one is devastation. World War I destroyed the nation. Many of the young men of Europe are gone. They're dead. When the war ends, there's not enough workers to rebuild the nation. And the nations needed rebuilding. Whole cities had been completely blown up by long-range artillery, burnt down. There's just rubble. Fields have been completely destroyed. Many fields have not been planted for years. Cows have been slaughtered. There's nothing. All of Europe is in extreme poverty, but the losers all the more because they have to pay a lot to the winners and not just in cash. Germany has many coal mines. That's part of what made them very powerful during World War I is that they had this big industrial machine. Well, they have to pay huge amounts of coal to France as part of their apology. And there are Germans living in coal mining towns that can't afford any coal to heat their own houses in winter. And there's Germans freezing to death because they're mining coal and shipping it all off to France. And there's French soldiers watching the mining towns, making sure all the coal goes to France. And Germans are going cold in the winter. There's famine. Almost as many people die of famine and sickness before and after the war than died of bullets during the war. It's really sad. The war is still killing people years afterwards of starvation and deprivation, and all sorts of terrible, sad things. On a slightly happier note, the map of Europe gets completely redrawn according to many of Woodrow Wilson's ideas that every people group needs to have a say in its own government. There are whole new nations being drawn on the map that hadn't existed for hundreds of years. One of them is Poland. See, Poland was right in between Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia. And many years before, Germany, Austria-Hungary, and Russia just invaded and each got a slice of Poland. And Poland didn't exist. The Polish are now German citizens or Austro-Hungarian citizens, and they're given their own nation now. Okay. Many other smaller nations are carved out of Austria-Hungary, and the whole map of Europe is different. Remember, Woodrow Wilson said that the world needs to be made safe for democracy. Well, now there's going to be much more democracy than before. The Ottoman Empire crumbles as many of the different little guys within the Ottoman Empire rebel and have self-government as well. One of those is going to be Israel. They don't get self-government right away. England decides that they need to rule as helpers for a little while. Okay. But Egypt gets self-rule, Syria, Lebanon, and the Ottoman Empire is reduced to scraps.